Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast. My name's Amanda.
I am Ryan.
And we will be your host today.
We will today.
Today we're talking about routines. I'm pretending like that didn't happen.
Routine talk, we will.
That's going to get old fast, like now.
My Yoda speak's not doing it for you.
It's just not working for me this afternoon.
So what is the topic of today's podcast?
Death by routine. That was my attempt at Darth Vader, but I laughed.
So yeah, we're talking about routines and how life enriching they are.
Yeah, so...
Well, can be.
Yeah. And we're, two people sitting here with, pretty routine lives at the moment. Yeah. So we're not coming to you from a place of routine-less life, but part of our inspiration for the podcast was that we moved to Canmore just over a year ago now. We haven't been on a super long trip for over a year as well, and we've been working pretty standard jobs for a year. So there's been a lot of routine in the last year. And after spending a year, I'm saying a year a lot, I think people get it. After spending the last year doing fairly routine stuff, I think, it's fair to say that both of us are kind of craving a bit of a change of pace.
Yeah. So we decided to talk about this today because, we've both kind of been, I don't want to say struggling with, but I've personally been feeling a little bit, I don't know, a bit down, I guess. I haven't been enjoying life as much recently. And it's kind of like
unfulfilled.
Yeah. I'm too bogged down in just day-to-day stuff. And weeks are flying by and not doing anything that really makes me feel super alive. And when we came back from traveling last year, about a year ago at this time, so it's something we've been thinking about, finishing our trip from South America, coming back and thinking we really want to continue a life that's full of adventure.
Mm-hmm.
It's something we can do. So we were planning on coming back to Canmore. We're coming back to Canada, spending the summer here. Canmore and Banff is a really nice area to be. There's a lot of travelers here, people from Australia and other countries who come here to spend time living abroad.
Yeah, it's pretty transient.
And we were planning on spending a few months here and then maybe going to teach English in China and just trying to have that sense of adventure in our day-to-day lives. And then over, months have gone by, we were enjoying it, kind of extended our time here. And now it's been a year, and I don't know. It seems I kind of feel sometimes we should have left already.
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of interesting because there's parts of me that kind of crave sort of that routine type situation.
What do you mean by that?
It's nice to shop at the same grocery store and know where everything is. And it's nice to, practice at the same yoga studio and know which classes you like. And when you get into a routine at work, things become a little bit easier. But at the same time, I notice that as things get easier for me and more routine, I feel less fulfilled on a day-to-day basis. And I am more or less living for my weekends. That's when's the day off? From work so that I can go out and enjoy myself.
Yeah. A while ago on our Facebook page, we posted this video of a guy who was biking from the U.S. all the way down to Patagonia.
Yeah, his name's Jedediah Jenkins, and we'll post the video on the show notes for this episode. It's super inspirational. I'm almost in tears every time I watch it because it's just
tears? Not
yeah,
really a tear-inducing thing, is it?
It just makes me long to be having adventures.
Yeah. And he kind of mentions as his motivation, this idea that when you're in a routine, you're kind of just time's changing. your experience of time is going by faster and faster and faster because you are doing the same things. There's differences, but it's vaguely the same thing. You know what you're doing. It doesn't take all of your mind to go through these things, like going to the grocery store you've been to 50 times, going to the job you've been to 100 times. You can just automate so much of that, and so your experience of time just goes by faster, and you get to a point where you're like, wow, it's been a year. That went by really fast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like where did the last year go?
And that's one of the big things I noticed going traveling. Like, when I think back over the last 2 years of my life, that 6 months of traveling South America seems to be more than the past year of mostly living here, working. And it was interesting going, like I spent a month in Central Europe. But I think having the same routine to go right back into after that trip kind of made it seem like like
it almost feels like you just kind of like didn't live that month. Like that month was kind of a dream.
It's kind of like an escape because you return to the exact same life.
Yeah, I felt the exact same way. It was weird going back to the same job and the same people and the same home. And it's like everything's more or less just the exact same. And it's like, yeah, but guys, like I just had this crazy adventure. Like I just did my yoga teacher training in Bali. Like that was a massive thing for me personally. People are like, yeah, cool. We got like these new pants in. And I'm like, oh, cool. Except not, you know?
Yeah. But I want to get back to something you said before about getting into the day to day and the feeling of like living for the weekends, because I think that's like the really big perspective change when you go from a job that you're working 5 days a week to traveling. Mm-hmm. Your kind of like point of living does kind of like subtly change, because it goes from you making this assumption that there's things you have to do that you don't want to do, and you're kind of wishing that those things would go away, like that it would be the weekend, that you would have freedom, that you want time to go by faster. And when you're traveling, your kind of like base assumption is just, you know, you just want to be enjoying life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It's interesting too, because, you know, like the job that I work here, and same with you, like they're pretty relaxed compared to the job that I worked when I lived in the city. And I still do have a lot of time during my actual like week of work to do things that are enjoyable, like hike in the mountains, or like go to a really great yoga class, or something that I really enjoy doing. Yet at the same time, my work has become so routine that it's like, so for me, my weekend's Thursday, Friday. So Monday is Saturday. So like, I'll just say Monday morning comes around and I'm like, sweet, what am I doing next Thursday? Or next Saturday, I guess. Which is something that has been like a pretty recent shift for me in my job here. And I think for me, that's the biggest sign that I'm ready for a change. And that, because that's like, I'm losing presence in my day-to-day life, which is a huge sign of just being in routine. Everything's very like automatic. It's kind of the times where I find like I can drive automatically. Like I'm like, oh, I'm here. Like, how did I get here? Do you know kind of what I'm saying?
I think so. I think we've been talking personally just about how some of the things we're experiencing kind of remind us of things we experienced before we went to South America. So if this is like the first episode you've listened to, we traveled after graduating university for 6 months, went back into, we're kind of just operating the assumption of like, oh, you know, we have this opportunity to go traveling after university. Then it's into real life, you know, you got to get a job, climb the corporate ladder, make money, be successful in that, you know, you, I don't know, achieve some sort of level of status in a profession and make money, buy a house, whatever, that kind of form of success. Both didn't like it. After 2 years, we go to South America, and then when we're there, we decide that that's not like the life we want to be living anymore. We want to be having like a life that we're engaged in and enjoying, and like a sense of adventure, kind of. Mm-hmm. But then, so now after we've been back here for a year, it kind of feels like some of those things I was feeling before of, you know, it's like my weekend, and it's like, wow, that week went by really quickly. And then like, you know, this feeling of like your last day off before going to work, and like,
it's like, oh, Sunday night.
Yeah, that just like, that feeling.
Hopefully listeners out there can relate to that feeling. I definitely can, for sure. I know exactly what you're talking about. It's kind of interesting to me, the difference in levels of presence between like traveling and sort of like living a life the way you choose, and then a life where you're working, where you kind of feel like tied down to a job because you need money to pay rent, to buy groceries, to go out with your friends, et cetera, et cetera.
So when you're saying presence, what do you mean?
I mean like actually like being there day to day.
And like noticing what's going on around you?
Yeah. So I think like it's really easy for like, I think humans in general are very habitual creatures. Like we do a lot of things by habit. So, you know, for a lot of us, we work at the same time every day. So it's like your alarm goes off at the same time. Maybe you snooze once, then you get up, you go to the bathroom, you put on coffee, you do whatever you do next, you go to work, you know, you read the news for 25 minutes, then you open your inbox, then you do XXX. You know, like so many people have this like routine thing that they do every day, and they do it every day so that the day to day, like Monday to Friday, is easier, less painless. And then they can just, you know, kind of cruise until they get to Saturday. It's comfortable. It's easy. And for me, that like comfortable easiness is really scary because it's not really living life. It's kind of just like I'm a robot going through the motions.
Do you feel like a kind of nagging sense of dissatisfaction when you're feeling that, like, oh, just make it to my days off?
Definitely. And like, I think after traveling the first time, I kind of felt this obligation, having graduated with a university degree, and I felt like it was like an obligation and expectation of me to get a job. And I felt like once I was in the job, and after probably about a year again, I kind of got that feeling of like, okay, I'm just like going through these motions, like day to day, doing a lot of things outside of work to try and like make myself happy because, you know, my day to day wasn't really fulfilling me. And then traveling the second time around, I was like, oh, life doesn't actually have to be like that. Like you can choose a life that makes you happy. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And like the point, maybe like, do you think your vision of what like the point is changed? Like the point of life?
Totally. I mean, I think that like as a child for sure, and I think as a teenager, like it gets like less and less as I got older, but I think I was really curious of like, why are we on this earth? Like, what is the like point of what I'm doing? Like, why do we all go to school and why do we all go to work? Like, why do we do these things? And then, you know, people complain like, oh, I don't like my job. And it's like, well, why are we doing these things?
Yeah. Like there's a lot of assumptions people make that if you ask them about, they really don't really realize they're making. Is that kind of what something? So like the assumption is like, you've got to get a job and work to make all this money so you can enjoy life when you're 60 instead of just enjoying life now. Yeah.
Yeah. I had a friend tell me like, oh, I like really just want to like live the life that my parents are living now. Cause like her parents have quite a bit of money and they travel a lot and they've got that flexibility with their jobs and that sort of thing. And I'm like, well, it'd be easy for you to live that life now. Like you don't have anything that's attaching you anywhere. You don't have a mortgage. You don't have children. There's no reason for you not to live that life. And it's like, oh, well, like, you know, it's like the time where I really need to work and build my career up.
And so I seen, like read something where someone made the argument that it was kind of an argument against kind of some of the like popular traveling memes about like, life's about adventure, life's about travel. And their point was kind of like, I'd rather work my ass off when I'm young, because then I get the benefit of like compounding interest over time on the money I earn and save. And then I don't have a family. I'm single. It's less of a sacrifice to make at this age.
Yeah.
Were kind of their main points.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I guess like, I don't know. I don't really know what to say to that. Like, I definitely like can get that, I guess, but like, does that like really make sense? What are your thoughts on it?
I think there's some good points. So like, when you look at the like if you read like an article or like a book on saving money and they have like a demonstration of compounding interest over time, it's pretty insane how intense it can get. So for anyone who doesn't know, compounding interest is just the idea of like, if you put $1 into the bank today at 2% a year, then next year it's $1.02 at 2%, and then the next year it's whatever. And so that interest on interest builds up over time. So if you if you save $10,000 when you're 20, and then have that in the bank versus having whatever, saving the same amount of money later, you're going to make more money over time. That was a terrible explanation.
No, I definitely understand that. I guess so. My thing is like, I'm not saying like go like live a life where you never work. Like that's not.
Well, it's not realistic.
Yeah, like money's a reality at this point in time.
What do you mean at this point in time?
Maybe it's not always going to be.
It's always going to be. Like there's always going to be this reality that to survive you need to
have some sort of like monetary value. Yeah, no, I definitely understand that. And I'm not like sitting here like, oh, just like never work, like leech off like your parents, or like, I'm not saying that at all. So I definitely do understand that sort of point. I think it is important to be smart with money. And if you do work a job where you make a lot of money, start figuring out how you can save that so you can really live a life that's like flexible and happy and doing things where you really enjoy yourself.
Yeah, because I guess the idea was that if you're trying to maximize like enjoyment or whatever, maybe it's better for you to do a lot of this unenjoyable stuff up front so then you can have more enjoyable stuff in the end, right? Mm-hmm. But to me, it seems like if you don't know how to enjoy being alive, then there's no point in trying to save it for the future because you're never going to be able to enjoy it.
Yeah, definitely. That's kind of been like my theory for a while. Well, it's like, why put like this cash that I saved this year in like an RRSP for when I'm 65 when I could take a trip with it now and have a really cool, memorable experience that's going to, change my life right now.
Yeah. So the idea, like, you should be living for the future for the next 40 years of your life until 65, which is like currently retirement age. Probably won't be retirement age in 40 years.
Yeah. I think that ties. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, just like as if 40 years from now, you're going to be able to just like flick a switch and be in enjoyment mode when you've spent the first probably like 60 years of your life, 60 out of the first 65 in this mindset of like everything's always about the future.
Yeah. And I think that this is what I was going to say before, and this still ties in nicely. Like it really connects to this idea that when you're kind of living a day-to-day life that's not fulfilling you, you really are living for your weekends. So then all of a sudden you have all this time. So then it's like, while you're on vacation, are you just living for the moments when you're home, or are you living for the next day? Or like, can you really find being present in that moment in like what's happening right now if you've spent so much of your life always looking into the future?
Yeah. So when you're saying being present in that moment right now, like you mean when you do reach this age where it's acceptable to enjoy life, like, will you really be able to like enjoy it and stop planning and thinking about the future? And
will you be able to just like, you know, sit down at a beautiful beach and be like, cool, I'm going to just like soak this all in and take it in and just really enjoy it.
And yeah, your whole headspace is like Monday to Friday. You're just hoping like, oh, I wish it was Friday evening. And then Friday evening shows up and you're like, oh my God, yeah, it's Friday evening. And then Saturday is like, that's cool. And then Sunday you're like, uh-oh, Monday's tomorrow.
Yeah.
And then Monday shows up and you're like, ugh, wish it was Friday. And then, so you're like, your whole experience of time is like, you don't enjoy it. You want it to go by faster.
Yeah. And then people, I feel like this is like a common thing that people say is like, oh, where does the time go? Like, time flies. Like, the years are getting faster. Like, oh, where'd the last like month go? It's like, well, if you're only enjoying 8 out of 30 days in your month, like, well, that's where they went, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Because there's, like, I definitely think it would be possible. Well, I don't know. Actually, no. Like, do you think it's possible to find a routine that is really, like, really enjoyable and fulfilling?
I think, like, it is possible.
Like, obviously, I mean, or do you think there's just kind of like a limited time frame?
I think there's a limited time frame. That's kind of what I was going to say is, like, it's just kind of been for me over the last few, like, weeks, maybe month, where I'm kind of like, okay, like, you know, my job isn't really exciting me that much anymore. And I feel like more so than anything else, like, you know, the first few months we were here, I felt like I was like, okay, I'm like kind of in a routine, like, but things were kind of still new. So I think that change is really important. So if you're really set on like living in the same place, maybe like committing to changing careers or like changing the place you work or maybe changing apartments. I think that changing something is really important. Like something pretty big in your life, not just changing like the coffee shop that you stop at in the morning before work. Does that resonate with you?
Well, I don't know. I feel like a bit uncomfortable with the idea of like trying to make recommendations for people, you know?
Yeah, totally. I'm not an expert on happiness or change, or I'm actually not an expert on anything.
But yeah, so I think that
from my experience, so that's like something that I want to live my life by. So I guess we'll frame it that way instead of a recommendation.
Because it kind of seems like the thing you were saying is like, you ought to have, you being like a third person, like ought to have this change in your life. Like you should be changing things.
Yeah, okay. I definitely like hear.
But is it kind of like, from your experience, like when there are quite a few like new, fresh things in your life, you've been more you've enjoyed life more?
Yeah, definitely. That's like exactly it. And I think too that one thing I've found it's like when I've lived in the same place for a while or I've worked at the same company with like the same people type thing is I get really caught up in like small stressors. So like day-to-day stressors that are like not important become kind of like my whole world. And then it's really hard to kind of like break free of that.
And that's something that I've really noticed about being in a situation where I am in like a working routine. And maybe I should separate between like a working routine and a working routine in like this, like my previous job situation and this one, is that there are all these like things that you keep in perspective that like when you're experiencing like small stress over and over and over again, there's like thing after thing after thing after thing, you kind of like lose perspective on those things and how they seem like more stressful than they really are.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you were really peaceful and enjoying life, you'd been hiking for a couple of weeks and then came back to work and this one thing happened, you're like, oh, whatever. That's on my mind to stress me out a little bit, but it's fine. Versus when you have like a 10 thing list or a 12 thing list, your mind just has this like want to escape.
Yeah. And I think that after you have worked or like been in a place for a while, you just become more a part of it. So
But you think that, what do you mean by more a part of it?
So it's like when I started my job and people were like, oh, so-and-so said this. I was like, I don't really care about that. Like that really means nothing to me. And then I'd like go about my job and then I'd leave and like feel fulfilled that I did a good job that day and could go and do other things that I felt enjoyment. Now it's like, I feel like I'm more a part of it. And then I kind of like take on those stressors and they come home with me. And then it takes me longer to decompress. And then my days where I work are not as enjoyable. And then I just want to have days where I'm not working. Does that make sense?
I don't really understand what you're saying when you say more a part of it.
Like work drama, people drama, gossip, like work shit. Does that make sense? Like, when you start at a job, so it's like you don't know anyone, you don't really know anyone's like...
You don't know like the power dynamics of the...
Yeah, you don't know power dynamics, you don't know like the little things that people are like, you slowly learn over time, where they're like, oh, you need to do this when so-and-so is working, or like, oh, don't say this to so-and-so, like, don't ask so-and-so for this. Like all those little things that you don't really know. Or like, you don't know people well enough for them to be like, oh, so-and-so said this, and like, it makes me really frustrated. It's just like none of that happens when you're new and like things are fresh. So it just like feels like less stressful. And then I feel like when I'm less stressed, I'm able to feel like more fulfilled.
So do you think that's more about like having a routine where you have to interact with people that you don't have, having a routine where you interact with people that you don't have choice to interact with, as much choice, than like more about that than about just it being like a routine thing?
I think it's definitely a combination. I mean, that's kind of similar to in our Learning Spanish in Buenos Aires episode, I talked about how that was sort of the first place that I'd ever been kind of conscious that I was living out of a backpack and wearing like the same clothes kind of day to day. Because all of a sudden there was like these people were getting to know me more and I was getting to know them more. And there was more of this fear of judgment and more of this like stress about how I was acting and what they thought about me. And I think that ties in sort of with developing something as a routine.
Because I think that to me is more related to the idea of like having control over who you're associating with. Like, I feel like when you get into situations where you lose control over who you're associating with, then there's all these kind of like more base power game, social game things that start to happen within your mind, like ways of thinking,
Mm-hmm. I feel like there's so many situations where you don't have control over who you're associating with, though.
But the stakes are lower. So yeah, that's a good point. So like, if I'm at a party and there's someone who like I don't really like or connect with is there, I could just like, leave that conversation.
Yeah.
Not associate with that person again, versus at a job where it's like the same person and it's like this small thing that wouldn't really bother you if you didn't have to see them 8 hours a day. Over time, it just drives you crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. That definitely resonates with me for sure. And I feel like that is kind of like what I was talking about in terms of like taking on those like stressors day to day.
Yeah. And that's one of the notes we made when we were prepping to talk about this was how relationships kind of change when you're in this day-to-day work mode versus like a traveling mode.
Yeah, because when you're traveling, you have like more choice over who you're associating with, or I guess who you're associating with for longer periods of time. Because if you talk to somebody and you don't really connect with them or have mutual interests, or you just don't really like them, you don't really have to continue that interaction. Whereas like if you're at work, you kind of do have to continue, you do have to continue that interaction and like make peace with it. So it's like there's a certain level of fakeness that I think comes out, kind of that like fake nice.
Yeah, there's like more of an incentive to be fake, right?
Mm-hmm, for sure.
And then I've noticed personally as well, like kind of a draining of curiosity that happens when you go from traveling to working and then being in a work routine. And not just like, one thing we've talked about before is about when you're traveling like into a new place, you're noticing all these things, like, you know, the people on the sidewalk, what the buildings look like, you know, the landscape, geography, stuff like that. Whereas if you're driving to work the same route every day, and like we both drive from Canmore to Banff, which is like, you know, a very, very beautiful scenic drive. Mm-hmm. But for me, it's just like whatever. I don't even notice anything that's happening.
It's pretty rare for me. Like
I'll like look and see the mountains, but it's not really anything that's like, wow, these are gigantic, impressive mountains. It's just kind of like, oh yeah, there's that mountain I see every single day.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting. I did a walking meditation this morning, and that's something that the guide was talking about in the meditation, is that like if you can really become present while you're doing something like walking, it's interesting to see the different things that you'll notice. Like all of a sudden you'll be like, oh, how long is like my neighbor's like front door been bright blue? Like, it's probably been bright blue the entire time. It's just that
you never really noticed it.
You never really noticed it because it's just like your neighbor's house. It's not something that you take a look at because it's not new and exciting. You're not going to photograph that. You're not going to post it on Instagram and show all your friends. Like, it's not really cool.
Yeah. But so, and not only like the curiosity about your surroundings, but especially with people, like when you go from traveling, and your interactions with people are very, you know, voluntary. And you're just like, you know, you ask people questions, you're curious about their backgrounds, you want to connect with them, whatever, to a work setting where there's this thing you ought to be doing. And you don't really have time to like talk with your coworkers about what's going on in their life and ask questions. You feel pressured to be doing something else. And like maybe in a customer service job, you don't have time to really interact with people. Mm-hmm. So you build the habit of ignoring your curiosity. And then so when you go back into like
denying it as well,
that when you go back into relationships that are outside of work, you maybe just don't do that as much. Because I think there's like, when you're in this like day-to-day work routine, there's this kind of like split that a lot of people want you to make, or there's a lot of pressure for you to make as a person between like work you versus like non-work you.
Yeah.
Instead of just having this like, just being how you want to be all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I think that it's like over time, if you're being like quote unquote work you, and that's not really you, like at some point you kind of lose who you actually are. I think like you could for sure.
Yeah. And so like the idea for like the title of the podcast was Death by Routine. But like, I think there is like a separation between just normal routine mm-hmm. and then like, obviously there's a lot that contributes to it more than just the routine.
Yeah, for sure.
If you have a morning routine where you're like meditating, whatever, that's probably not a bad thing. But I do think there's a value in breaking your routines and having a chance to really like evaluate what's going on with them and change.
It's even like, it's like not stopping meditating altogether. Maybe it's like, okay, I've been meditating every morning for the last month. I'm going to try meditating before bed for the next like few weeks and see how that goes. You know, there's like ways to change your routine without completely dismissing stuff that could be really like beneficial to your life.
Yeah. And even I think stopping probably has some benefit, because then you can get back to noticing like, oh, wow, I really felt better when I did that all the time.
Yeah. I mean, that's the biggest thing, like in terms of healthy eating for me. It's when, you know, like I go, I don't know, to something like a wedding and I eat a bunch of like dessert and have some alcohol, where I'm like, oh, wow, I feel really crappy when I eat sugar and drink alcohol. like, can't wait to eat my salad for lunch, like on Monday.
Yeah. Someone said, I was listening to a podcast and they said, everything in moderation, including moderation.
Yeah.
So like not always doing everything in moderation, occasionally just like going crazy.
Yeah.
To learn like, oh yeah, you know, I really do enjoy when everything's in moderation. But I think like, so we're going to be trying to make some changes to our life and our routines in the near future.
Yeah. Started by moving our bed.
Yeah. Moving stuff around in our bed, but also, you know, leaving here, going somewhere new.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's been really like easy for me to identify, like the feeling of like, oh, I want to switch things up.
Yeah.
Go somewhere new, try something new. Like because of the travel experience we've had in the past.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's parts of me that like feel sad when I think about leaving the things that I really love about being here. But then at the same time, I feel so excited to discover new places and meet new people and break away from the routine that I've been in now, because I know that that'll be so beneficial for me based on my experiences breaking routines in the past.
Yeah. And I think for me, especially, like, I don't think I've really learned the lesson. I've like tried at points of really like appreciating things while I have them, like being grateful for the things I have instead of feeling like upset about the things I'm missing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure like when we leave here, it'll be this feeling of like, oh, I miss this, I miss that, I miss all these things. So I want to try to appreciate them. But I think that's like a lesson you learn over time, where you do move to a new city and you're like, oh, I miss all these other things about my old city.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think that's true.
And it's something now that like, as we're kind of like racking up places we've lived and like places we've been, I don't know, it's hard for me to imagine having just like lived in one place my entire life.
Yeah, that just sounds not ideal to me. Like, it just seems kind of boring, actually.
But I think that's one of the things about traveling for a long period of time, that it kind of wakes you up to this like sense of engagement and enjoyment in life that kind of makes that other lifestyle of doing the same thing every day, living in the same place, like the same city, like it kind of makes it intolerable in a way.
Mm-hmm.
At least for me,
Yeah.
that was kind of my personal experience.
I agree as well. Like, it kind of gives you that opportunity to really see the difference in yourself and your levels of happiness and your life in general in different places, and like when you're changing and that sort of thing. And I think that was like the big shift for me. It's like traveling and being like, wow, like I found this so much more enjoyable, and I'm so much happier than I was in the last year working and kind of doing the daily grind and being a weekend warrior, that sort of thing.
Do you think you'll ever get to a point where you're like, oh, I really just want to like be in one place for the next like 20 years?
I don't know. I really have no idea. What do you think?
I don't know. Maybe like there's a place that I feel really like, I definitely could see myself living here in the future.
Yeah. I've thought that maybe like having children, just like, I think it's really hard on children to move them, especially if they're like in school and stuff. Like, it's really hard for them to make, like, it's a big, like, kind of rattles their world a lot. So in that case, I think that.
Yeah. I think that this lifestyle of changing where you're living, it doesn't work with kids, because I don't think you can do that to them. Well, you obviously can, but like I think it's a whole kind of
I think it's really disruptive to their development
of your children. Then that's a terrible thing to do.
Yeah, so I think that I would definitely find ways to be fulfilled every day if I had a child that I was taking care of. Mothering, I guess, would be the word. But other than that, like, I don't really see myself being super settled until that point. But We'll see. I don't know the future. I'm living in the present. anyways, if anyone has any questions or comments or.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you guys about your experiences. If you've maybe done some long-term traveling in the past and now settled into a routine that you're happy with and feel like you can sustain for a long period of time, or maybe you've had the opposite experience. We'd love to hear from you about your experiences.
Yeah, for sure. So check out the show notes at www.theworldwanders.com. You can follow us on, or like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, contact us on our website. And as always, thanks for listening.
Bye.